It was the morning I had been working toward for 18 relentless months. My thesis, the culmination of years of study, countless late nights, and every ounce of perseverance I had left, was hours away from submission. I'd been awake for nearly 36 hours, surviving on coffee, and the stubborn belief that no matter what my family thought of my pointless education, this was the day I would prove them wrong. The house was unusually quiet when I sat back down at the dining room table, my workspace spread with carefully organized notes, printed references, and my aging laptop humming steadily. It was 7:06 a.m. I had less than 5 hours until the noon deadline, and the finish line was finally in sight. All that remained was a final proofread, precise formatting of references, and the upload. For once I allowed myself to feel something close to pride. Then my father walked in. He stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, eyes narrowing at the sight of me hunched over my laptop. "Still playing student, I see," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone, part mockery, part contempt. I ignored it. Today was not the day to take the bait. I simply said, "Good morning, Dad. I'll be done soon." But the interruptions began to stack, each one deliberate, each one slicing into my concentration. My mother appeared, complaining about my papers taking up space. My father turned the television up to a deafening level. My brother arrived, boasting about his promotion at the steel mill, earning my father's proud applause. Every word, every glance was a reminder that in this house my work had no value. By 11:30, I was almost there. The thesis was complete, citations checked, abstract polished, file ready to submit. And then, suddenly, my internet connection died. I checked my phone. No service. My father, still watching television with perfect internet connectivity, did. My mother, Doris, worked part-time at the local diner, but her real job, as far as my father was concerned, was to keep the house exactly as he demanded. She'd learned early that disagreeing with him was dangerous. Days of cold silence could turn into nights of explosive rage, and eventually she stopped resisting altogether. Over the years, she became his echo, repeating his opinions back to him and reinforcing them to anyone who might question them. If I ever dared to speak up about my schoolwork or achievements, she'd laugh nervously or look away, as if agreeing with me might make her the next target. Frank, my older brother, was the golden child. He dropped out of high school his junior year to work at the mill alongside my father. That decision cemented his place as a real Thompson, the kind my father bragged about at family gatherings, clapping Frank on the shoulder while dismissing my academic goals with a shake of his head. "None of that book nonsense," he'd say. "Just honest work." Frank soaked up the approval like sunlight, parroting my father's disdain for education until it became his own belief. From the time I was small, I knew I was different. Words fascinated me. Numbers whispered patterns and secrets I wanted to decode. I'd lose myself in kitchen science experiments until my father would storm in, barking about wasting food. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Sanderson, was the first to recognize something in me worth nurturing. She told my parents I had remarkable analytical skills. They nodded politely, then forgot her words before we even left the parking lot. By 5th grade, I'd won the district spelling bee. My photo made the local paper. I was glowing, holding my certificate while other kids' parents snapped pictures. Mine never came. Dad said he had to work overtime, but later I overheard him telling Frank it was ridiculous to celebrate no one. I didn't know it then, but the contempt I grew up with was forging something stronger than approval ever could. It was shaping the resolve I'd need to survive everything that was coming. From as far back as I can remember, curiosity felt like both my greatest gift and my most dangerous secret. In a house where the highest compliment was being called a hard worker, wanting to read instead of watch TV was almost an act of defiance. Every time I opened a book, I wasn't just learning. I was quietly rebelling. I discovered early that learning could be my escape, even if I couldn't physically leave yet. Words became doorways. Numbers were puzzles only I seemed interested in solving. I'd sit cross-legged on my bedroom floor with a stack of library books, devouring them one after another, while the rest of the house revolved around television schedules and shift changes at the mill. The earliest battles were small but memorable. In 4th grade, I asked my father if we could get a dictionary for the house. He looked at me like I'd asked for a yacht. "Why would we need that? You can't eat a dictionary." My mother chuckled like it was a joke. That Christmas, Mrs. Sanderson slipped me a gently used paperback dictionary wrapped in brown paper. I kept it hidden in my desk drawer, afraid my father might throw it out if he saw it by middle school. My harmless interests had evolved into something my family openly mocked. Science projects were a particular sore spot. I remember standing in the kitchen with mason jars lined up, each holding water samples from different streams around town. I was testing for pollutants, carefully logging results. My father walked in, took one look, and said, "So now you're wasting time playing scientist instead of doing something useful?" My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, a small smile playing at her lips. Not because she thought it was... Graduation day should have felt like triumph. I was valedictorian, the first in my family to earn such a title, and I had a full-ride scholarship waiting for me at State University. But in the Thompson household, my achievement was met with silence. The principal had called my parents personally to invite them to the ceremony. They didn't come. Dad was off on a fishing trip with Frank. Mom said she had a migraine. I stood at the podium, scanning the crowd, knowing there would be no familiar faces cheering me on. When the ceremony ended and other students rushed into the arms of their proud parents, I stood alone until Mr. Vaughn appeared with a small wrapped gift. Inside was a leather journal with an inscription, "Your journey is just beginning. The world needs your voice." I held onto those words as tightly as I held onto the scholarship letter hidden under my bed. The night after graduation, I finally told my parents about the scholarship. For a brief, naive moment, I thought they might show pride. Instead, the room fell into a suffocating silence. Then Dad hurled his dinner plate against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. "So you think you're too good for honest work? Too good for your family?" he snarled. "Books and theories don't feed people, Allison. Real work does." Mom kept her eyes fixed on her lap. Frank smirked and said, "Always knew you were weird." That night, I packed everything I owned into one battered suitcase and a backpack. As I zipped the final pocket shut, I knew the bridge between us was already burning. I didn't own a car, so I boarded a Greyhound bus for the 3-hour trip to campus. When I arrived, the contrast between my reality and everyone else's was crushing. Families unloaded minivans packed with bedding, mini-fridges, and laundry baskets. Mothers fussed over room arrangements while fathers assembled desks. I had one suitcase. Despite everything, my grades soared. My professors noticed my work ethic. Dr. Lewis, my psychology professor, pulled me aside after class one day. "This analysis shows remarkable insight," she said. "Have you considered majoring in psychology?" That suggestion lit something inside me. Studying family systems, attachment theory, and resilience gave me language for what I'd lived through. Knowledge wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a tool for understanding. Even healing. Sophomore year brought some stability. I still worked 2 jobs, but I'd learned how to stretch every dollar. I found the campus buildings with the best heating in winter and air conditioning in summer to save on utilities. By junior year, I'd earned a research assistant position that paid better than service work. Professor Harrington told me, "Your perspective on socioeconomic factors and family psychology is unusually nuanced." He had no idea how personal my insight was. By senior year, I was thriving academically. My thesis work on family dynamics and educational achievement had professors urging me to apply to graduate programs. When I got my acceptance letter, with a teaching assistantship that covered most expenses, I felt vindicated. For once, I thought maybe my parents might see what I had accomplished and be proud. I was wrong. The acceptance letter to graduate school should have been a moment of pure celebration. It came with a teaching assistantship that covered tuition and provided a modest stipend, the kind of opportunity I'd worked years to earn. Against my better judgment, I called home to share the news. Mom answered. "I got accepted to the graduate program at State," I said, keeping my tone even. "Full funding and a teaching position." "Oh," she replied after a pause. "So, more school then. When are you going to get a real job?" "This is a real job, Mom. I'll be teaching in Dewey." Other mentors, like Dr. Lewis from undergrad, continued to check in, offering advice on research design and professional development. These were the people who filled in the gaps my family had left. People who believed in me, not because of shared blood, but because of shared values. Still, the hustle never stopped. Even with the assistantship, I worked weekends at a cafe to make ends meet. My days began before sunrise, with lesson planning for the classes I taught, followed by my own coursework, research meetings, and hours of reading. My evenings were spent wiping down tables or steaming milk for lattes, and my nights belonged to my thesis. The fatigue was constant, but so was the sense of purpose. Every hour I put in felt like an investment in a life beyond survival. I'd learned to navigate without safety nets, and the resourcefulness I developed during undergrad became my greatest strength. Yet, no matter how far I advanced, the gap between my academic world and my family's world felt unbridgeable. At conferences, I presented research to professors from across the country. At home, my father still referred to my work as school projects and questioned when I'd join the real world. The contrast was exhausting, but it was also clarifying. Every dismissive comment confirmed what I had long suspected. I wasn't going to win their approval, and maybe finally I didn't need it. It was that realization, fragile but growing, that carried me forward into the final stretch of my graduate program. I didn't know it yet, but the biggest test of my resilience was waiting for me just ahead. Returning to my hometown during graduate school was supposed to be temporary, a calculated financial decision. The rent was far cheaper than living near campus, and I told myself that the 20-minute commute was a small price to pay for stability, but stability in my parents' home. Then came Frank, my brother, dropping by more often. Always during the hours, I was deep in concentration. He'd barge into my room unannounced, leaning against the doorframe to tell me about family gossip or remind me of obligations I hadn't agreed to. It felt deliberate, like a coordinated campaign to break my focus. The pressure mounted. I began working through the night when the house was quiet, catching only a few hours of sleep before heading to campus. The exhaustion was bone deep, but I clung to my schedule. I had 6 weeks until my submission deadline, and I couldn't afford to lose momentum. Then, just as my stress peaked, Dr. Westfield gave me critical feedback on my draft. My analysis was strong, she said, but I needed to restructure it to make the theoretical framework clearer. It was a major revision, and it would take time I didn't have. To make matters worse, a technical glitch corrupted some of my backup files, forcing me to reconstruct complex statistical analyses from memory. The house became unbearable. Dad's interruptions escalated, his jabs about real work sharper and more frequent. Mom suddenly found endless chores that couldn't wait until after my deadline. Frank's visits became more intrusive. Every moment I spent fighting for my focus was a moment stolen from the thesis I'd poured my soul into. Still, I refused to break. I'd survived 4 years of undergrad without their help, often in spite of them. I told myself I could survive a few more weeks. I didn't know then that their resistance was about to cross a line I could never uncross. The final weeks of my thesis would become a battle, not just against deadlines, but for my dignity, my safety, and my future itself. The final stretch of my thesis was supposed to be exhausting but predictable. Long nights, too much coffee, and a race against the clock. Instead, it became a siege. By the LA. Then came the overheard conversation that snapped something inside me. I'd gone downstairs for more coffee at 2 a.m., only to hear my parents talking in the kitchen. "She thinks she's so smart with all those books and big words," Dad said. "What good is a fancy degree if you still live with your parents at 24? Frank had his own place at 19. "All this education, and for what?" Mom replied, not defending me, but agreeing. "No husband, no children. Just papers nobody will ever read. Waste of time." I didn't confront them. I just went back to my workspace, my heart pounding. If anything, their words hardened my resolve. I worked for 20 straight hours, fueled by coffee, adrenaline, and the knowledge that I was almost there. By the morning of the final day, my thesis was 90% ready. All I needed was one last proofread, a few formatting checks, and to submit by noon. It was going to be tight, but I was going to make it. What I didn't know was that the deadline wouldn't be my biggest problem. The real danger was already awake in the next room. The morning of my thesis submission began deceptively calm. After nearly 36 hours without sleep, I was running on nothing but stubborn determination and bitter coffee. The dining room table was my war zone, neatly stacked reference materials, my battered laptop humming with the open document, and the clock ticking steadily toward the noon deadline dot at 7:06 a.m. I felt something close to relief. My thesis was essentially done. All that remained was a final proofread, precise formatting, and uploading the file. For the first time in weeks, I let myself think, I'm going to make it. Then Dad walked in. He stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, eyes narrowing at my setup. Still playing student, I see, he said, his voice oozing the same condescension I'd heard my entire life. I kept my reply neutral. Good morning, Dad. He laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. Your future? That's a joke. He stood, stepping toward me. What future does endless schooling give you? Frank has a house, a promotion, a real life. You've got a stack of papers no one will read. Mom appeared in the doorway, silent, watching. I'll reset the connection myself, I said, moving toward the router. His hand shot out, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. You don't touch anything in my house without permission. Let go, I snapped, yanking my arm free. I just need internet access for 5 minutes. This isn't about internet, I said, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. It's about you being threatened by the fact I chose a different path. His face twisted, and his voice dropped to that dangerous quiet I remembered from childhood. You ungrateful little... I cut him off. The unforgivable sin in our household. No, I'm not ungrateful. I'm ambitious. I'm determined. And I'm not going to let you sabotage my future just because you don't understand it. I turned to grab my laptop and leave. That's when it happened. With a burst of speed, he ripped the laptop from my hands. For a split second, I thought he might just hide it. But then he raised it high above his head. Our eyes locked. There was no hesitation. The laptop came down against the side of my head with brutal force. Pain exploded white-hot, and warm blood began trailing down my temple. I staggered backward, vision blurring, as the laptop hit the floor and split apart, the screen hanging by a single wire, plastic shards scattered like shrapnel. You're not worth a future, he snarled. You're just a leech. And then, from the doorway, my mother laughed. Blood was dripping into my eye when I knelt to gather the shattered remains of my laptop. The screen dangled from the keyboard by a single wire, the casing cracked open like a bra. From the living room, Dad's voice thundered, If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. Ungrateful children don't get second chances in this house. See what you've started? Mom added, her tone somehow both pleading and accusatory. Just apologize and this will all blow over. Something inside me shifted. I saw it clearly, the pattern I'd been trapped in all my life. The aggressor and the enabler, working in unison to keep me small. No more, I said quietly. I walked out, my bag clutched to my chest, blood still running down my temple. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. I made it to my car before the dizziness hit hard. My phone read 11:40, 20 minutes to the deadline. No laptop, no internet, no plan. For the first time in my life, I couldn't think 2 steps ahead. All I could do was start the engine and drive, away from the house, away from them, toward whatever came next. I didn't have a destination when I pulled away from the house, just an overwhelming certainty that I could never go back. My head throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat, each pulse a reminder of what had just happened. The washcloth I pressed to my temple was already soaked through, and my vision blurred every time I turned my head. At 11:52, my phone pinged with an email from Dr. Westfield. Allison, noon deadline approaching. Please confirm submission status. 8 minutes left. I was sitting in a car, bleeding, with a destroyed laptop and no way to recover the files. My future was sliding out of reach. Then something inside me hardened. If my family had taught me anything, it was how to push forward in the face of impossible odds. I typed back with trembling fingers. Emergency situation. Heading to campus now. Please advise about late submission protocol. The reply came almost instantly. What kind of emergency? Are you all right? I hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth anymore. Physical injury requiring medical attention, laptop destroyed. Cannot access thesis files. Will explain in person. Her next message was firm. Go to University Health Services immediately. I'll meet you there. Don't worry about the thesis right now. Her concern was so different from my family's reaction that it nearly undid me. I drove slowly to campus, fighting dizziness, and staggered into the health center. The receptionist took one look at me and ushered me into an exam room. A nurse named Linda began cleaning the wound while asking gentle, careful questions. My father smashed my laptop against my head when I tried to submit my thesis, I heard myself say. The words sounded unreal, even to me. This injury is consistent with what you've described, she said quietly. We'll document everything. Dr. Westfield arrived just as the physician confirmed I had a mild concussion and needed 4 stitches. Her face tightened at the sight of me. My God, Allison, what happened? I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then said, First, your thesis isn't lost. You sent me a draft 2 days ago. At minimum, we have that version. Relief washed over me. In the chaos, I'd forgotten. Second, the university has procedures for this kind of situation. What happened to you is assault. We need to report it. Campus police are next door. Would you be willing to speak with them after we finish here? I nodded. If my father had crossed a line, I could cross one too. The next hours blurred together. Medical treatment, a formal police statement, arrangements for emergency housing in a graduate apartment. The dean's office granted me a 2-week extension. The IT department took my broken laptop, confident they could recover most of the files from the intact hard drive. By the time I reached my temporary housing, the immediate crisis was over. My wound was stitched, my thesis salvaged, and my ties to my parents, at least physically, severed. Lying in the unfamiliar bed that night, I realized something profound. My father's attack had been meant to end my future, but instead, it had ended my connection to the people most determined to hold me back. I'd lost a home that never truly was one, and gained the freedom to finish what I'd started, entirely on my own terms. The days after the attack were a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. Physically, I was healing. 4 stitches above my right temple, a lingering headache, dizziness that made me move slower than I liked. Emotionally, I felt as though I'd finally stepped out of a shadow I hadn't even realized was always there. University Health Services monitored my concussion, and I started twice-weekly sessions at the campus counseling center. For the first time, I could talk openly about the years of emotional undermining that had led up to the violence. Naming it, hearing a professional call it abuse, was both painful and liberating. While I rested, the IT department worked on my laptop. The next morning, a technician arrived at my door holding a small external hard drive. We were able to recover most of your files, he said. I connected it to the loaner laptop Student Services had given me, and there it was, my thesis, almost fully intact. The last few edits I'd made that morning were gone, but compared to what could have been lost, it was a miracle. Despite the concussion protocols recommending no screen time, I spent the next several hours making those final edits. My head pounded, my vision blurred, but the determination that had carried me this far wasn't going to fade now. By late afternoon, I uploaded the finished document to the university portal. Seconds later, the confirmation appeared. Thesis received. Submission recorded. I had done it. Over the next month, I prepared for my thesis defense. The dean's office postponed it to allow me to recover. And when the day finally came, I stood before my committee with a calm I'd never known before. The questions were sharp but fair, and my answers came easily. The work was mine, built through sleepless nights, sacrifices, and a stubborn refusal to quit. When it was over, Dr. Westfield smiled and announced, "Highest honors, unanimous decision." It was the validation I'd dreamed of for years, but the most important change wasn't on paper. I had moved into permanent campus housing, paid for through a research assistant position Dr. Westfield had helped me secure. My new apartment was modest, but every corner felt like mine. No one to sabotage my work, no one to mock my ambition. I filed for a restraining order against my parents, and it was granted without contest. They didn't show up to the hearing, sending instead a statement through a lawyer that painted me as prone to exaggeration. The judge read the police report, the medical records, and the photos of my injury before approving the order for the maximum term. Frank reached out a couple of months later, appearing in my office with an awkward apology and a brand new laptop to replace the one Dad had destroyed. It didn't fix what had happened, nothing could. But it was the first time he'd acknowledged the truth out loud. I agreed to keep in touch with him, on my own terms. As my research position evolved into a more permanent role, I began connecting with other first-generation students whose families didn't support their education. Without revealing my own trauma in detail, I could see the recognition in their faces when I said, "Sometimes the resistance you face says more about their insecurities than about your choices." The life I was building didn't include my parents, and for the first time, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the truest form of freedom. 1 year after the attack, I stood on a stage in a crowded conference hall, my hands steady on the podium. The event was the National Conference on Educational Equity, and I'd been invited to present my research on educational resilience in first-generation college students, research born from my own scars. As I looked out at the audience, educators, researchers, students, I felt no trace of the girl who had once hidden her achievements under a loose floorboard. I began, not with statistics, but with the truth that had fueled my work. Educational resilience isn't just about pushing through economic barriers. It's about holding on to your self-belief when the people who should be your greatest supporters become your biggest obstacles. I spoke about patterns I'd found in my interviews, the undermining comments, the passive-aggressive distractions, the outright sabotage. I explained how these experiences could erode confidence and derail promising futures unless students had access to outside mentors, safe spaces, and validation. I didn't name my family, but their shadows were everywhere in my words. The standing ovation at the end was humbling, but the true reward came afterward, during the networking session. Students approached me, some with tears in their eyes, to say they saw themselves in my framework. Professors asked how they could implement my recommendations in their own institutions. One young woman told me, "I thought I was alone until I heard you speak." I realized then that I had done more than defend a thesis. I had turned personal pain into a blueprint others could use to navigate their own storms. Meanwhile, my parents remained exactly as they'd always been. Through Frank's occasional updates, I learned they still downplayed the assault, telling relatives it had been a misunderstanding. They framed themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter's. Their refusal to change confirmed that keeping my distance was the right choice. The real transformation had been mine. I no longer sought their approval or explanations for their behavior. I had finally understood what years of research and counseling had been pointing toward. Their treatment of me was never about me. It was about their own fears, limitations, and the mirror my success held up to their lives. No amount of achievement could change that. 2 years after that day in the dining room, I hung my framed graduate degree on the wall of my new apartment. A small silver scar still marked my temple, a faint reminder of the moment my old life split apart. My phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Westfield. Curriculum Committee approved your proposed course on family dynamics and educational resilience for next semester. Congratulations, Professor Thompson. Professor. The title landed like a quiet victory bell. My father had said I wasn't worth a future. But here I was, building one entirely my own, surrounded by a chosen family of colleagues, mentors, and students who valued me for exactly who I was. If my journey had taught me anything, it was this. We can't control the families we're born into, but we can choose the people we become and the families we create for ourselves. Sometimes the greatest gift toxic people give us is showing exactly what we will never become. So when I stood in front of my first class the following semester, I carried with me not just the research and the lesson plans, but the hard-earned certainty that no one could take my future from me again.